Yesterday, Donald Trump's attorneys filed their formal brief to the United States Supreme Court advocating that Donald Trump should be entitled to absolute lifetime presidential legal immunity, and it's truly as gross as it sounds. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we're going to play this quick clip here, just kind of like summarizing the news, the announcement of the brief itself. Then I'm going to read you what is, in my opinion, the grossest excerpt, the weird, I mean, just it's skin crawling from the document itself. And then we're going to play some other clips as well. But this is in regards to the upcoming Supreme Court case in which they review Donald Trump's claim that as a former president, he is effectively God King and can't be criminally prosecuted for any, sort of crime that he may have committed while he was president of the United States. Indeed, as stupid and counterproductive and counterintuitive as it sounds.
Breaking news. This is out of the Supreme Court as well, this time involving Donald Trump. The former president has just filed his immunity brief in the special counsel's election interference case. Joining us now is NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. So this is a brief ahead of the oral arguments, which happen next month.
That's right. And essentially, one of the big headline arguments here that Donald Trump is making is that it would be the end of the presidency as we know it if the court doesn't recognize these really broad, sweeping immunity claims that the president is seeking, basically trying to get rid of these charges in connection with his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election in the lead up to the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Something else that jumped out at me just sort of doing a brief read through as we got before we got on air was that they really emphasized the importance, sort of, this is ironic, coming from the Trump folks, of the importance of the press and congressional oversight, saying that those are other checks on presidential power in this case that could be used instead of criminal charges against a president. So they're really going very broad here and saying that this case should just be dismissed all the way. Everything should just be dropped, and then making a sub argument after that, saying even if the court recognizes some sort of qualified immunity, sort of laying out the argument for how exactly the court should be. The lower court, Judge Chutkan, should be ordered to handle that when eventually, or if eventually, she gets this case back in her courtroom, Katie.
Right. So this concerns really in particular, the January 6th case, and perhaps the Fani Willis case out of Fulton County, Georgia. Trump's case is, listen, I was president of the United States when I tried to overturn the election. Therefore, because I was president when I was doing it, it counts as something that the president, it basically counts as an authority and ability and a duty of the office to try to overturn an election as a candidate. And therefore, I'm entitled to absolute legal immunity for anything I do while I'm president. And so you should dismiss it. Or if it's a qualified immunity, like it's not absolute immunity, then this should count under that qualified immunity and should get rid of it. Again, as gross as it sounds. The excerpt which really weirds me out is this one right here. So, and the gentleman in question was just kind of referencing it. So it's on page, I think, 40. Well, it'll be 35 in the document, but if you look at the PDF reader, it's 46 for me. So the very bottom of the page, indeed, quote, a rule of absolute immunity for the president will not leave the nation without sufficient protection against misconduct on the part of the chief executive. They're quoting Fitzgerald v. Nixon, which concerned President Nixon, and it concerned absolute civil immunity for official actions committed while president, which is infinitely more understandable than what Trump is asking for here. But I digress. In addition, there are formal and informal checks on presidential action, including constant scrutiny by the press and vigilant oversight by Congress. And again, as the reporter in question just noted, it's ironic that Trump, Donald freaking Trump, and his attorneys are appealing to the press and congressional oversight as potential checks against Donald Trump, even though he despised both of them and did everything in his power to question and undermine the credibility of both, right? So he's like, hey, you could use these other things to keep Donald Trump in check, but Donald Trump did everything in his power to make those checks impotent. So the whole thing is just, it's just a completely ridiculous argument. Thus, the existence of alternative remedies and deterrence establishes that absolute immunity will not place the president above the law. Accordingly, the founders envisioned, and this court has often emphasized, that the impeachment process and other informal checks would be the exclusive means of deterring presidential malfeasance. I'll say it again. In Trump's attorney's estimation, They're like, yeah, the court and the founders envisioned that the impeachment and the press being mad at you is basically the only way to deter the president. Super gross. I completely disagree with that interpretation. But then at the end, this is where it gets really nasty. But even if some level of presidential malfeasance, not present in this case at all, were to escape punishment, that risk is inherent in the Constitution's design. The founders viewed protecting the independence of the presidency as well worth the risk that some presidents might evade punishment in marginal cases. They were unwilling to burn the presidency itself to the ground to get at every single alleged malefactor. That, my friends, is gross. What they're saying is, listen, even if, what we're arguing for would allow a sitting president to eventually avoid accountability. Let's say he's not impeached. Let's say he's impeached but not convicted. Let's say we don't learn about the crime until after he leaves office, and Trump's attorneys had previously argued that you can't impeach a former president. Let's just say that happens. Well, it's what the founders wanted. The founders were like, hey, listen, it's worth it to make the president, legally immune. It's so gross. It actually runs contrary to what the founding fathers actually wanted, which was, yes, an independent president, sure, but a president who was subject to checks and balances because they recognized that there was no single office which was as important or powerful than the president. And they just waged a war to escape the yoke of a distant monarch. They had abundant concerns about making the president too powerful. So to me, as far as I'm concerned, this is a complete rewriting of history. Nowhere did the founding fathers ever even imply that the president of the United States should be permitted to commit crimes while in office and to get away with them with impunity. Absolutely disgusting. I want to play this clip too as a reminder before I play some other clips of attorneys reacting to this legal brief. Because to me, this goes to the heart of the matter in terms of this weird, gross, authoritarian impulse to make Donald Trump or a Republican president, or even any president, including a Democrat, some sort of monarchical god king.
He was a dictator for 4 years. Absolutely. This country needs a dictator. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
He could stand on the front steps of the White House and commit murder, and I'm with him.
If he says it, then I'll go with it. And if he wants to be a dictator, then so be it.
This is it. The Thomas Nast cartoon. Patriots festooned in American flags, co-signing dictatorship. Remember We the People? There's more words after that, right? Smaller font, still binding. Look, if you want to love Trump, love him. Go to the rallies, buy the sneakers. You want to give him absolute power? You want him to be the leader uber alles? You want him to have the right of kings? You do you. But stop framing it as patriotism. Because the one thing you cannot say is that Donald Trump is following the tradition of the founders. He is advocating for complete and total presidential immunity. His words, not mine. That is monarchy shit. And it's your right to support it. But just do me a favor for historical accuracy. Next time you want to dress up at the rallies, wear the right colored coats.
Absolutely. Listen, it is your right to advocate for a monarchical god king, to make Donald Trump above federal law and the Constitution, even though we know you would never, ever, ever even consider the argument if it were in reference to a Democratic president. I digress. But yeah, at least try to be consistent about it, right? If you're comparing yourself to patriots, you're actually, in that case, the British redcoats who were trying to uphold the rule of a sovereign god king, effectively. Now, this next clip I want to play is attorney Glenn Kirshner reacting to Trump's brief. And by the way, Kirshner is one of my favorites. I think he is feisty. I think he's combative. I think he's incisive. I think he's relentless. Great legal commentary.
What really sort of bothered me when I was reading through this new court filing in the Supreme Court, the very first sentence of the section labeled summary of argument, I'm going to use a nice word, Jonathan, is inaccurate, or I could call it a lie. Here is how they open that section of their brief. They say, quote, "A former president enjoys absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for his official acts, close quote. Here's the problem with that assertion of fact. There is no law, there is no precedent, no appellate court opinion, there is no constitutional provision that supports that assertion of fact. Indeed, the Constitution provides the exact opposite in the impeachment judgment clause, where it says somebody can be impeached by the House of Representatives and convicted on the articles of impeachment by the Senate, and they can still be prosecuted for the same conduct. So if they wanted to open their brief with, we would like the Supreme Court to adopt the position that a president has absolute immunity created out of whole cloth, that would be fine. But when they assert something as a matter of fact and it's not a fact, I think that's a really weak way to open a Supreme Court brief.
I completely agree. I don't know what the result of this will be. I like to think that it will be a 9-0 decision against Trump. But, you know, to be honest with you, I'm losing certainty with each passing day. As you know, I have enormous issues with the Supreme Court. And over the past week or so, and more issues have come out. The fact that recently the Supreme Court is effectively, at least temporarily, allowing Texas to enforce immigration law, even though immigration law is, historically speaking, been considered to be the exclusive province of the federal government, just to me suggests that this court will bend over backwards any way it possibly can to benefit Donald Trump. So maybe they'll rule the opposite way. Maybe they'll rule the way they should, but it would be, you know, a 5-4 decision. I don't know. But this just absolutely gross for anybody. And I do mean this, anybody. And I say this as an unapologetically partisan Democrat. I would be appalled and disgusted if anybody on my side of the aisle advocated for Joe Biden to enjoy something like this, Barack Obama, or a future progressive Democratic president. The notion that any president of any party is given a blank check to commit crimes with impunity, that they are not subject to criminal prosecution, especially once they leave office, is completely anti-American. It's unpatriotic. It's anti-democratic. It's really gross, and it should be relentlessly mocked, belittled, and made fun of. People who believe this should be shamed. So you and I should do our parts to do that. Let me know what you think in the comments.